Hey neighbors, the Handyman here with Initiative Coffee Company along with the Serpent of Rama himself, Jake Del Maro, and today we're talking about DDEX-02-07 Bounty in the Bog. Writer Ken Hart, editors Claire Hoffman, Chris Tulach, and Travis Woodall. Bounty in the Bog is a 4-hour mod set for Tier 1 play tuned for 5 third-level characters. It features a caravan escort followed by exploration through the bog, capped off with an encounter with the Cult of Black Earth. Hazards of the Road. Captain Hulk is charged with securing the road south of Mulemaster to Raven's Bluff. Bandits are attacking caravans on the road, disrupting trade. Securing the road would result in a payday for the party. They can guard a soon-departing caravan and use the trip as cover to investigate, but they should not, by any means, tell the caravan the purpose behind their escort. Jake, when we look at the opening of this mod, what are the initial thoughts we come up with here?
The big thing for me is it kind of feels a little bit the hooks themselves. I'll start there. The hooks, they're back to the ones that weren't, 2-7 or 2-6, where they actually had like coherent, like, hey, you should bring in other people from old adventures. This here is like, you're willing to work for food. It's like, come on.
Yeah.
Just say something along the lines of like, Culkin has other businessmen. I don't know. If you don't like Culkin, you don't need to use Culkin. But like, right. It's like, okay, so anyone belonging to the Emerald Enclave or Lord's Alliance. If they're not, then they are working for food. I don't necessarily like that intro, but it's your DM. You're up to the DM to do a little bit of a adjusting, and I think that this would be appropriate place.
Yeah, this is adjust. The 5th Tier 1 mod. In season 2, I think there's been enough. Realistically, this is probably not the first mod you're going to run in the season. If it is, you'll have to get creative. But realistically, if you run 4 other mods in season 2, you can implement all matter of NPCs from other modules to try to engage the players. Here, you're introduced to Captain Hulk, who is a new NPC. Someone could have put you in contact with him. He could have come and asked for assistance from a contact you have. Maybe there's a noble or a benefactor that's looking out for your interests who thinks it might be a good opportunity. I don't know. There's a lot of opportunity here to just kind of play off the stuff your table has already done and kind of move into a pretty straightforward module. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty kind of checks all the boxes. Pretty satisfying, I think. In general, I think this mod is a good one. I mean, it's not going to be my favorite mod by any means, because it's just kind of by the numbers, but it's a nice way to this is especially good for new players, right? It's a nice way to introduce the game to people who are unfamiliar with it.
It actually, further into the mod, there's a lot of backstory here regarding the cult. This is going to be about the Crushing Earth. There actually is a surprisingly large amount of info for the cult. I think it does the most direct means of this can be addressed further on, but as a very direct mean of being you just fought elemental earth cultists. And I do like that. After what happened in last mod, where it was very much extra fluff, this one does not really give you the necessity. It's like you go meet with this one guy, he tells you pretty much get a move on. I will say that I do have a problem with is this rumor mill part where it gives you, after you meet with this guy, you find out he rose to fame really fast and people don't like him, but you only find that out if you while you to ask your party, hey, this person's heading out next morning. What do you want to do? People are gonna be I'm just gonna go buy stuff and hang at the bar. But there's a lot of info here that kind of feels lost, ancient history. The Turning Key. This Turning Key company is a female-only adventuring group that is from years past, and kind of it gets threaded in every so often, but I don't want to say it adds a huge level of volume to the actual mod. But it kind of gives reason why people are going and looking at this area.
Yeah, and I think it's valuable if for no other reason that it adds a colorful aspect to the module and the region, right? This all-female adventuring group is kind of a cool concept. It establishes like the notion of adventuring parties that like go out as units. It establishes kind of some history in the Sword Coast region. The issue I have here is it's another situation where like if that information isn't sent across the table to your players, it doesn't exist.
Yeah,
right?
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter if you don't make it matter. But other than that, I mean, there's some of that in every module. I think this is particularly interesting. I think you should probably kind of try to work to include it somehow. But admittedly, it can be pretty challenging.
The other thing I want to mention is this might be my own love for playing this character. The female gnome, Angara Hedix, the clientele that you are protecting. I've always loved doing this because it's an annoying part of being an NPC, is bringing something to life. So I always have my car keys out jingling when I'm talking with her, simply because, like, she's just a ridiculously overdone, like, I think of her kind of like, someone that's just like a mystic, kind of has way too much jewelry on, kind of that. And like, it's kind of, it when people hear that extra stuff, it's like a small flavor add, but it's definitely enough for me where if somebody did that to me, I'd just start laughing. I'd be like, what is this?
And it's enough to get your players engaged, right? Like,
it's a natural sound that brings people's attention back to you.
Yeah, obviously you're not going to want to like aggravate your players with like tricks and tools like that, but it's a nice like almost like a cheat to get your players engaged again. And I'm not against cheating if it's beneficial to everybody's good time at the table. So the North Road. Not surprisingly, there's an ambush on the road. After fighting off the bandits, they can provide some information for the party, if any were kept alive. The bandits were hired by Aldera, who has a camp deeper in the swamp. The party can easily track down the bandit camp, where they find several items, including insect repellent. I guess to clarify, the camp they find is the one on the road for the bandits that attack the road, not necessarily Aldera's camp. Typical bandits attack a caravan kind of encounter. Regular standard fare for tier 1 adventures. Maybe 2 standard fare. It's kind of bland, I think.
I think they add a nice twist to it, though, which is important to note. They're all about not telling the party or the crew that you're protecting about the info about, hey, there's probably going to be an ambush. And that comes up actually as an interesting decision to be made, because if you don't tell them, someone dies, and the caravan dies. If you do tell them, it's like they extra prepare for it, and there was something.
Their armor and
they've had their armor, but it's like there's kind of a disdain, like of why, like they were like they're like, oh, so you guys expected this. So it definitely presents an interesting decision because it's for the welfare of the party plus the
that's true.
Argent.
I guess there's not a lot of action in AL because of the drop-in nature. I don't know that there's a lot of actions in AL that have meaningful consequences, and so maybe this isn't as meaningful because largely like the NPC dies or she doesn't, and then when you finish the mod,
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't come up again. But the fact that like your inaction has a consequence is an interesting aspect that like,
and a very immediate one too.
And I think it's an interesting aspect that like, from someone who comes from a like a homebrew background, seeing like consequences to actions is very exciting for me. But maybe not commonplace for people who are regularly using AL as their general game, right? I don't think there's a lot of instances in AL where like if you don't do a thing, this thing happens, versus if you do a thing, this other contingency happens. And maybe that's short-sighted on my part, but nothing really comes to mind in meaningful ways. Not like the death of a character for sure.
So. The other thing to note about this bandit camp area is that this is where I would say you're within 30 minutes, 45 minutes of you starting off the adventure, or maybe a little bit more. The information, if you capture someone, where that whole rumor mill of like, hey, the turning key comes into play, because then it's like, oh, Adara Moonfist, and apparently she was maybe potentially part of the turning key,
Sure.
or could be a descendant of that. And it's like, that's another slap in the face, kind of like, hey, if you don't do this information is like, oh, you don't know about this.
Sure, and I guess like to some degree, if like that information isn't valuable to you as a DM, you're not obligated to pass that information along to your players.
Sure.
But I think it's good information, right? Like, and like that's my opinion. Obviously, like,
oh, of course,
at your table, you're entitled to make the decisions you choose. I think it's cool. I think it's for whatever reason, I think it's interesting. I would be inclined to find ways to incorporate that information into my table, but
agreed.
Maybe you won't.
It's not like the mod is hinging on it, though. I think that's
right.
I think that's the big thing to mention.
Right.
Is it's not hinging.
And I don't know that it plays into other modules, right? Like I don't know if the turning key comes up frequently throughout other modules either. But like it's a cool kind of thing to kind of explore and elaborate on here. The other things that I would say, like to make sure you take note of and pass along to your party, make sure that when they investigate the camp, they find the bug repellent, the insect repellent. That will or won't come up later depending on their choices. But if they don't know about it, obviously it's not going to play into the future encounter. So
it's actually a little treasure trove of items that you get. You get a bunch of scrolls that are very useful. Not only necessarily in this mod, but like others. And you find a spell book. I think this might be the first spell book that you find
in season 2, I think
in season 2, and it's a nice little spell book. It's got a bunch of different stuff in it, so like definitely, I don't want to say dangle this in front of your wizard, but like this thing is clearly something that comes up, and it's like it's a pretty solid spell book. It's actually, considering AL rules, it's where you can get some of the elemental evil spells which are otherwise unavailable, and they can actually put them in their spell book. This will also come up, and this is more of an admin issue, or an admin level thing, making sure you understand how the wizard transcription is from one spellbook to another. It is very expensive for them, but like highlighting the fact that they now have another spellbook where they can slowly do these things, whether they have Charm Person or Magic Missile, I don't know, I don't really care. But like getting an Earthbind, Earth Tremor, Snilex Snowball Swarm, those are all very interesting spells that you can't get.
Right.
But either way, it's a good place to find new spells and a really cool reward for any wizard.
Sure. Yep. The Foreboding Forest. After the party sets into the bog, they encounter a patrol of lizard folk led by Sequaxu. They are angered by the cultist presence in their territory. The party chooses to hear out the tribe, and someone can effectively communicate with them. They're pointed to the grotto, where the intruders have established camp. As the party heads deeper into the bog, the bug repellent from the bandit camp comes in handy. If players don't use it, giant wasps attack, but if players utilize the repellent, they aren't noticed by the insects. I think this is a cool encounter. It really, this mod was written before Volo's Guide came out, so like the notion of having a lizard folk character wasn't part of the intended course of action for the mod. But like having a lizard folk character in the party is a cool concept. All of a sudden it's very available. Obviously lizard folk, I mean, they speak Draconic, so if you don't have anybody who speaks or understands Draconic, this kind of social encounter is going to be challenging to say the least. But, if somebody took the time to put Draconic on their character sheet, it's a valuable resource. Like those language aspects don't come up very often in Adventures League, and so when they do, I think you should really lean into them and reward characters for those other like seemingly secondary mechanics that I think are a lot more valuable than their presence in AL really warrants.
So the other thing I like to mention about this part, which I think is fun, is they actively tell you, hey, if they don't have Draconic, because even like they state, it's a very archaic Draconic they're speaking, is to play a game of charades. I love it because then it's like people are trying to interact, and like it's just it's a laughing moment of some sort, but like definitely you can make performance checks, you can insight checks. There's a whole host of things.
Of the game. Yeah, it's a different a different like road to go down that is often overlooked. I like it.
And then there's something that is brought up here, that will I'll bring up here. If you help them, they give you a lizard folk fetish that allows them to, like, anyone in the Moon Sea, any lizard folk tribe, to become friendly. And I don't know why it wasn't a story word that was created. I mean, there's not like you're running into lizard folk tribes left and right, but like that is something that that I think if they do help these guys out needs to be mentioned. Like, of course, that's at the end of the mod, but like it is like they're innately xenophobic. But like if they get this, if you get this fetish that they're given, it's like, hey, I come in peace. I've helped other people. I've helped other lizard folk. You know, like, we're Gucci, and I do believe that it is an important part of the mod and an important reward that might go overlooked. Story rewards are very important.
Yeah, and I think like the fact that a story reward wasn't written in here is indicative of how early this was in AL. Maybe like there wasn't a formalized process to deal with story rewards necessarily.
Sure.
I think this is a valuable one. I think it's cool. I think lizard folk come up once or twice in most seasons.
Yeah.
So I think like just having this little thing that will help your players along occasionally in the future is kind of a valuable thing.
Yeah.
They come up pretty free. I don't know. Like, I guess like CCCs, everything comes up as frequently as everything else in CCCs. But
agreed.
I think having this little trinket is a valuable resource for players, and it's something they can take away from the mod and have like a meaningful resource that isn't going to count against their magic item limit and isn't going to count against their like gold piece cap or those kind of things. So,
and as you said earlier, giant wasps are not fun to deal with. Like, as a DM, you can just run through a party with them, and it says baseline 3. That is a lot of giant wasps dealing 5 to 10 damage to you, or I guess it'd be more than that. It's like 10 to 16 damage to you.
Yeah.
Per hit,
and
which knocks you out.
And it's not a particularly like interesting combat for players. Like, it's not like giant wasps have a bunch of cool abilities that they're cycling through that are like challenging players in new ways. It's just like they hit, you take damage. You
take a lot of damage.
Yeah. So.
So I mean, it's cool doing the box text. I think they're important, but like, say, hey, the 3 giant winged insects are zipping out of the holes, and they would fly to you, but you don't because you got insect repellent on. Yeah. Like, definitely still read the box text though.
Yeah,
just make a slight adjustment at the end.
You know, if your players don't use don't use the insect repellent, I don't know. I don't know if 3 is valuable. I don't know if like this particular encounter needs to be altogether challenging. Sometimes encounters should just be pretty easy and just check resources. Yeah. And I think that's the intention of this anyway. So, make the wasp last 2 rounds and then it's gone or done or killed or whatever. Yeah. Let your characters make choices about what resources they're going to use to like handle the wasp, and then just kind of move on. I don't think there's a lot of value in like hanging your hat on this encounter. So, part 3, Subterranean Surprise. Entering the grotto. On the way in, the players spot violet fungi just off the path. They're easily avoidable if spotted. Situation muddy. Entering the grotto, the party encounters mud mephits and a gray ooze. And once in the cavern, Eldera, 3 sacred monks, and a giant badger are digging out a pit in the middle of the chamber. The party can sneak up on the encounter, but as soon as the enemies spot them, combat starts. After Eldera is defeated, an Indolect Devourer leaves her body and flees to report to its master. There is a large green stone rectangle at the bottom of the pit that is apparently the prison of Tavor the Mad One. Yeah, I think there's a lot here. You know, I think the violet fungi are a nice little exploration component to an otherwise straightforward module. I know our group kind of wanted to try to use those to our advantage and try to lure people out of the cavern, but just based off the encounter, that's not how the encounter goes.
They are pretty nasty though. Violet fungi are pretty nasty. Like, I would say that maybe in the future I would probably adjust it to maybe like one of them's around or something in there. Like, you could use it as a resource. Like, oh, one of these mephits in the head got too close, necrotic damage, and like I think it could be utilized
Mm-hmm.
maybe as like some sort of safety mechanic for players, because I don't want to say that these fights. I mean, you've got 2 rapid succession fights. You got 3 mud mephits and a gray ooze. Gray ooze. Make sure you remember, if they hit the party, or someone decides to grapple the gray ooze, it does hurt their armor. It does hurt their weapons.
As long as it's metal.
Yeah. So like, it's gonna be a problem, but like the mud mephits have their idea of get blinded. Gray ooze gets advantage. Pretty standard stuff. If you wanted to,
mephits have their cool exploding ability, which is relevant to keep track of.
Like, I maybe would even go as far as the gray ooze is like, you get advantage in the first attack because it is using its false appearance. But then beyond that, we have other situations where you have the Adara Moonfist, who's trying to use her sneak attack as often as possible. You use the 3 gargoyle mass sacred stone monks. These guys, I'll even from hard book to here, these guys have always been the coolest OG guys, because they have this very stoic mask that is literally made out of stone. It's not even like some like ceramic. It's made out of stone, and it is a cool mask. And you have a giant badger who's just actually a nightmare. Like,
and I don't know that it specifically brings it up, but I would incorporate the same kind of alterations to this giant badger that are in 2-1. It's got onyx claws, and it's got, it's been somehow modified by the cult of crushing earth. Those kinds of things add more color and add more stakes, I think, to the encounters. I wouldn't overlook the notion of like your party trying to use its environment to its advantage. If even if your party isn't going to encounter enemies near these violet oozes, if they are violet, the violet fungi, even if they're going to like come up with a plan just in case, I might give those party members advantage. Those kinds of things, just to like show that you appreciate them thinking out all of the aspects of the encounters. The intellect devourer is an interesting choice, I guess. It's one of those situations where I don't know how mind flayers fit into the season. I guess like they could, because mind flayers can do whatever, like be involved in whatever they deem necessary, but it just seems a little off topic.
It's like, I guess, forces at hand, but it's like, even like, this is tier 1.
I feel the same way about this mind flayer as I do about like Slotty in season 1, or like demons and giants in the hard book in season 1. Like, yeah, you can make an argument that as to why they're there, but really, like, what's the point and how does it further the narrative? But beyond that, like, it's a pretty straightforward encounter. It's got this cool like magic item at the bottom of this pit. It's a prison.
It's actually a really significant prison.
It's a significant prison.
It's like, it's like one of those situations for me. It's like, why the heck are tier 1 people going? I mean, they wouldn't have known, because this is, I guess, like the introduction of all the elements. But like, it's like the same degree of like, this guy, like, wants to be. He's awaiting his release when the great elemental battle comes. And it's like a 15-foot by 10-foot like thing that has wards on it that are beyond time, like that people have just disintegrated while trying to open. Like,
and it's described as not a devastation orb, but on the level of significance as a devastation orb. Like, it's one of those things that like these small children have tripped into this nightmare. Like, tier 1 is a low level to encounter such a potent item, but like, whatever, I get it, I guess. The thing to keep in mind is like, after this combat ends, and like the module points it out, is like, what are you going to do with this item, right? The module points out that like, are you going to tell guards about this very powerful item? Who do you trust? I think like, if you've made friends with the lizard folk, I probably trust the lizard folk more than anybody else, because they're more focused on their territory than advancing their noble houses. I think when we played it, that's who we like told to oversee this and ask them to like take wardship of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, your players are going to come up with whatever maybe they have background organizations they think could effectively take care of this. I think it's worth spending a little time with your players to determine, like, you don't want to leave this rare, dangerous artifact out and available to anyone, do you? You know, those are the kinds of things that, like, advance the story toward the next session.
The other thing I also think is important here is looting. I know in AL we have there's a very different kind of mindset. If it has to be labeled in the treasury section or whatever it may be, and now with hour limits. But like, this to me is an important point in the realm of like just overall like adventuring. So they mentioned the cultists, these Earth guards. What was if these guys want to take the stone mask? Now they have a disguise.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it is important that if they want to take that, make sure they put that. There's only 3 of them, or I guess however many there are.
Right.
But like to put that on their character sheet. Now they do have that because I played with them, or they've got it on your character sheet to prove that they have it. I think that is important because how are you going to infiltrate? Well, I've got this cult cloak. I mean, I don't have it to Urgala, whatever the heck the guy's name is.
Yeah, and I think like that jives with the AL is meant to support, in this organized play system, is meant to support the hard books, right?
Yeah.
And I think in most of the hard books, it's expected that a lot of the chapters are not, I go in and kill all of the monsters in this chapter. Like, a lot of them, at least in like Tyranny of Dragons and Princes of the Apocalypse, there's an understanding that like you're going to have to use some level of subterfuge to successfully navigate this, or you're just not going to have the resources to complete it.
It's going to be so absurdly difficult.
Right.
Like,
and so I think like the idea of like collecting disguise elements is a really interesting one. That if not baked into AL, like in spirit, it's there, based off of the ties to the hard books that are available.
Sure thing. I agree.
In conclusion, after the party defeats the Cult of Black Earth, they can determine what to do with the Greenstone Prison and give Hulk their report. They'll have to determine how much to share with the captain. We kind of went over that. Overall, I think, like I said, this is a pretty by-the-numbers module. I'd say
it's
like
a breath of fresh air. Honestly,
it's a breath of fresh air.
And I hate picking on mods outside of the respective
Videos,
slotted session. Like, last mod was a rough mod. You only have 3 or 4 NPCs here, and they're like not necessarily super important NPCs, but it's like it's a breath of fresh air to have a point-click mod. And the other part of it is it can be a shorter mod if you. I mean, I think that giant wasp encounter is typically the one that will either push it to 4 hours or beyond 4 hours. But I also haven't, in my times of running this multiple times, I can't say that I've ever actually used the giant wasps. Because
you have players that are engaged enough to realize, like, he gave us insect repellent.
Gross.
There's probably a reason.
Yeah. If it's not immediately applied, like it is.
Yeah. And I think this is a good mod to set as like a baseline. I think this is what people should expect. The quality in this mod is what people should expect from all of the mods they run, right? Yeah. Some are obviously going to be much better, and those will be surprising and exciting. But
this should be the baseline.
But this should definitely, at the very least, it should be easy to follow. It should have some straightforward elements, a couple of combat scenarios, interesting NPCs that may or may not build to anything greater outside the module, an exploration component, a social component. And so I think, like, by the numbers, like I said, this is a benchmark to look for, and kind of compare other mods against, for better or for worse.
The other thing I want to mention here is this is the first time that I think, directly knowing what's happening next in the next mod, that the magic item is relevant. Okay. It's really neat. I mean, the current AO mod is everyone gets the item drop.
Sure.
This, at the point of time when this was written, I mean, wrote, whichever. I don't know how advanced thinking they were. These weren't written in trilogies like they currently are now. or duologies or whatever that you want to call them, they are written as independently workable mods. You don't need to worry about a 12-hour mod because it's not split up. This is an independent standing idea and standalone. And I do like it because the next mod incorporates a level of water usage, which I think is kind of interesting in terms of who's using this. It's like this was an Earth cultist, or I guess it wasn't directly an Earth cultist. It was technically a mind flayer that was controlling an intergalactic hours, controlling this woman. But like, it does come into effect next mod where there is a lot of water, and I think that's very neat, and it can be very helpful for a party and also annoying for a DM because it circumvents half the mod.
Yeah, and I guess we'll get to that next time, right?
Sure.
But ultimately, like,
I do like the idea
useful
of
resources that build toward something.
Yeah.
I think largely part of the issue is that these mods are written independently and then kind of thrown together in a seasonal kind of context.
Sure.
So the idea of like items from the last module or information from the last module being relevant in the next one, aside from like the trilogy or dyads, dual mods that are written with that specifically in mind, it just doesn't really come up. You'll see that less the case in the Eberron side of things because they're all written by Sean Merwin, so all of those mods are consistent, and like I haven't looked at them, but I would hope and assume that they build off of each other in a much more straightforward way. But the nature of having like several authors join onto the project for the season kind of implies that there's going to be some kind of disconnect between the modules.
It's just one of those mod series that I like. This is a perfect setup for the next one because it gives, like, back then you had unlimited items, but you had of course attunement slots. Ring of Water Walking wasn't necessarily the top one on your list of things to have, but you're also tier 1, so you necessarily didn't have that many. So maybe one person had it and he could shine because it allows, and this will be for that other video, but it definitely allows for one person to be like, hey, I'm using my resources. I decided to use this. And I do think that's important, but that will be something.
And it rewards non-combat focused items, which I think is a rarity as well.
Yeah.
So there it is, DDEX-02-07 Bounty in the Bog. Thank you so much for listening to some advice to streamline and run it for your tables. Be a good neighbor, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon. And from now until the next time, we're together.